"You don't belong here." Those 4 words, whispered with cold venom in a first-class cabin, sparked a chain reaction that would eventually bring a billion-dollar airline to its knees. When Madison Courtney, a socialite used to getting exactly what she wanted, decided to torment the quiet black woman sitting in seat 3A, she thought she was just clearing out the riffraff. She didn't know that the old man in 1A wasn't sleeping, he was the man who owned the airline. And she definitely didn't know that the nobody she was abusing held a secret that would turn this flight into a nightmare for the crew. Buckle up. This is the story of how arrogance met its match at 35,000 feet. The air inside the TWA hotel at JFK Airport was thick with the scent of espresso and expensive perfume, a stark contrast to the biting November wind whipping against the glass terminals outside. For most, the airport was a place of stress, rushed goodbyes, lost luggage, and the indignity of removing one's shoes in public. But for the select few holding a ticket for Flight 882 to London Heathrow aboard Sovereign Airways, the experience was designed to be a seamless glide through luxury. Dr. Imani Lewis adjusted the strap of her worn leather satchel, her shoulders tight with a fatigue that went deeper than her bones. At 42, Imani had the kind of face that held stories, eyes that were sharp and observant, framed by laugh lines that hadn't seen much use in recent weeks. She wore a simple charcoal turtleneck and loose trousers, comfortable for a transatlantic flight. To the untrained eye, she looked like a tired mother or perhaps a school teacher on a budget holiday. There were no Gucci logos on her bag, no Cartier bracelet clinking against her wrist. She stood near the gate, clutching a boarding pass that bore the coveted Group 1 designation. It was a gift from the university, a thank you for the grueling 3-week symposium she had just led on structural integrity in aerospace engineering. She just wanted to sleep. "Excuse me, you're blocking the lane." The voice was high, nasal, and dripping with entitlement. Imani blinked, stepping aside instinctively before she even registered who had spoken. A woman swept past her, trailing a cloud of sickly sweet floral scent. She was blonde, impeccably coiffed, and wearing a cream-colored cashmere travel set that probably cost more than Imani's first car. She was on her phone, speaking loudly enough for the entire gate area to hear. "No, Daddy," I told them. "I specifically said I needed the bulkhead for my legs. If there's anyone next to me, I'm going to scream. I cannot deal with the public today. It's been a nightmare just getting through TSA. Can you believe they made me take off my blazer?" This was Madison Courtney. Her Instagram bio boasted lifestyle curator and brand ambassador, but her primary occupation seemed to be spending the allowance provided by her father's real estate empire. She stopped at the counter, slamming her passport down. "Madison Courtney," she announced to the gate agent, a harried young man named Todd. "I'm in 3B. Is the seat next to me empty? Please tell me it's empty." Todd typed furiously. "Ah, Miss Courtney, welcome back. Actually, Flight 882 is fully booked this evening. Every seat in first and business is taken." Madison pulled her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose, fixing Todd with a glare that could curdle milk. "Who is in 3A? "I can't disclose passenger information, ma'am," Todd said, his voice trembling slightly. "Well, move them," Madison snapped. "Bump them to business or economy. I don't care. I need space to work. I have a brand deal to edit." "I can't do that, Miss Courtney. The passenger in 3A has already checked in," Madison scoffed, grabbing her boarding pass. "Fine. But if they breathe too loud, you're hearing about it." She spun around, her eyes locking onto Imani, who was still standing quietly nearby. Madison's gaze raked over Imani's practical shoes and her nondescript bag. She let out a short, derisive laugh, a sound meant to be heard, and turned back to her phone. "Yeah," looking at the crowd. "It's going to be a long flight." Total zoo. Imani said nothing. She had been black in America long enough to know that engaging with a woman like Madison Courtney was a losing game. She just wanted to get to her seat, put on her noise-canceling headphones, and disappear. Behind them, sitting in a wheelchair near the priority lane, an elderly man watched the exchange. He wore a slightly rumpled suit and a flat cap, looking like a grandfather on his way to visit family. He held a cane across his knees, his hands gnarled with arthritis. Nobody paid him any attention. The gate agents rushed past him, the wealthy passengers ignored him. But Arthur Sterling saw everything. He saw the way Madison sneered, and he saw the dignified silence of the woman in the charcoal turtleneck. Arthur tapped his cane lightly on the floor, a small, rhythmic sound. He checked his own boarding pass. Seat 1A. He was tired, too. But he had a feeling he wouldn't be sleeping much on this flight. Group 1. First class. You may now board, Todd announced. Madison surged forward, cutting off a businessman. Imani waited a beat, then followed. As she walked down the jet bridge, the cold air hitting her face, she felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She knew, with a sinking feeling, that 3B was next to 3A. She was about to spend 7 hours next to Madison Courtney. The cabin of the Sovereign Airways, Boeing 777, was a sanctuary of soft beige leather and ambient blue lighting. It smelled of champagne and warm towels. Imani found her seat, 3A, a window pod that offered a good amount of privacy, unless, of course, your neighbor was determined to invade it. She stowed her satchel in the overhead bin, careful not to disturb the oversized Louis Vuitton duffel bag already occupying most of the space. As she sat down, settling into the plush leather, she let out a long exhale. Excuse me? Imani froze. She turned her head. Madison was standing in the aisle, staring at her with an expression of pure incredulity. Yes? Imani asked, her voice calm. Are you sure you're in the right seat? Madison asked. She didn't say it kindly, as if offering help. She said it like an accusation. This is first class. Economy is back that way. She pointed a manicured finger toward the rear of the plane. Imani reached for her boarding pass, which she had tucked into the seat pocket. I believe I am. 3A. Madison snatched the pass from Imani's hand before she could offer it. She squinted at it, looking for a flaw, a date error, anything. Finding none, she thrust it back. Weird. Usually, they keep these seats for frequent flyers. I fly often, Imani said simply, turning her attention to the window. Right, Madison muttered, finally sliding into seat 3B. She immediately hit the call button. A flight attendant appeared instantly. He was tall, with gelled hair, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name tag read Greg. Yes, Miss Courtney? Champagne before takeoff? Greg asked, his tone dripping with sycophancy. He clearly knew who she was, or at least knew her status level. Greg, darling, Madison leaned in, lowering her voice, but not enough. Is there really nowhere else I can sit? I feel cramped, and there's a smell. Imani stiffened. She had showered 2 hours ago. She wore a very light, clean deodorant. There was no smell. Greg glanced at Imani, his expression tightening. He didn't greet her. He didn't ask for her drink order. He looked at her as if she were a piece of luggage that had been misplaced. I'm afraid the cabin is full, Miss Courtney, Greg said, offering a sympathetic pout. But I'll make sure you're extra comfortable. 2 glasses of Dom? Please, Madison sighed, flouncing back into her seat. And bring me some wipes. I want to wipe down the armrest. God knows who's been touching it. Imani closed her eyes. 7 hours, she told herself. Just 7 hours. From the front of the cabin, in 1A, Arthur Sterling was settling in. He declined the champagne, asking for a sparkling water instead. He adjusted his hearing aid slightly. The acoustics in the cabin were excellent, carrying the conversation from row 3 directly to him. She said, "There's a smell." Arthur mumbled to himself. He sniffed the air. Nothing but leather and Madison's own overpowering gardenia perfume. He watched Greg, the flight attendant. He knew Greg's type. He had hired thousands of people in his life. Greg was a climber, the type of employee who kissed up and kicked down. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. He clicked a pen and wrote down, Greg, row 3. Attitude problem. The plane began its pushback. The safety video began to play. Imani watched it intently. It was a habit from her days in the Air Force and later as a safety consultant. She noted the emergency exits, counted the rows. She listened to the engine startup sequence, the low whine of the GE90 engines spooling up. Can you stop moving? Madison snapped. Imani looked at her. I'm just putting my seatbelt on. You're elbowing my space, Madison lied. The divider was up. It was physically impossible for Imani to elbow her. God, why do they let just anyone up here now? It used to be exclusive. Imani turned fully to face her. Miss, I paid for my ticket just like you did. I'm tired, and I'd like to have a peaceful flight. Please. Madison's jaw dropped. She looked at Imani as if the woman had just slapped her. Did you just shush me? Do you know who I am? My father is Robert Courtney. We practically built the west wing of this airport. That's very nice, Imani said. But right now, you're just a passenger in seat 3B, and I'm in 3A. Madison's face turned a blotchy red. She hit the call button again, aggressively. Ding, ding, ding. Greg rushed over, looking annoyed but not at Madison. Is there a problem? She's being aggressive, Madison said, pointing a trembling finger at Imani. She's threatening me. I don't feel safe. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. In the post-9/11 world, the words "I don't feel safe" were a weapon. They could get you dragged off a plane in handcuffs. Greg turned to Imani, his face hard. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down. We have a zero-tolerance policy for aggression. I haven't done anything, Imani said, her voice rising slightly in disbelief. She is harassing me. Lower your voice, Greg commanded. Or I will have the captain turn this plane around. Imani bit her lip, her heart pounding. She looked around the cabin. A few people were watching over their magazines. No one said a word. The injustice burned in her throat like acid. She nodded slowly, retreating into her seat. That's what I thought, Madison whispered, picking up her champagne. She clinked the glass against the window, a toast to her victory. Arthur Sterling, in 1A, gripped his cane. His knuckles were white. He looked out the window as the plane taxied, his reflection showing a face of stone. He wasn't ready to act yet. He needed to see how deep the rot went. The flight had been airborne for 2 hours. The cabin lights were dimmed. Most passengers were sleeping or watching movies. Imani had her reading light on, reviewing a technical schematic for a landing gear assembly on her tablet. Madison was awake, 3 glasses of champagne deep, and bored. She had been taking selfies with the flash on, illuminating the dark cabin every few minutes. Imani had politely ignored it, pulling her sleep mask down. Then, the turbulence hit. It wasn't the usual bumps. It was a sudden, violent drop. The plane shuddered, the engines roaring as the autopilot tried to correct. A few passengers gasped. Madison squealed, spilling her 4th glass of champagne all over her cream cashmere lap. Ew, oh my God, help. She scrambled up, shaking the liquid off her pants, flinging droplets onto Imani's face and tablet. Hey, Imani exclaimed, wiping her screen. Look what you made me do, Madison shrieked. You jinxed the flight with your negative energy. Turbulence isn't caused by energy, Imani said, wiping champagne from her cheek. It's clear air turbulence. Sit down and buckle up. It's going to get rougher. Don't tell me what to do, Madison yelled. Greg came stumbling down the aisle, holding onto the overhead bins for balance. Ladies, please, fasten seatbelts. Greg, Madison cried out, tears of drunken frustration welling up. She threw her drink on me. Look at me, I'm soaked. It was a blatant, insane lie. Imani's drink was still in the holder, untouched water. Greg didn't look at the cup. He looked at the distressed, wealthy blonde woman. He looked at the quiet black woman who had caused trouble earlier. He made a choice. Ma'am, Greg barked at Imani. That is assault. Are you blind? Imani snapped, her patience finally shattering. My water is right here. She spilled her own drink. I saw you, Madison lied, sobbing now. She hates me. She's been muttering threats the whole time. The plane dropped again, harder this time. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged aggressively. I am going to have to move you, Greg said to Imani. I can't have you endangering other passengers. Move me? Imani laughed, a cold, hard sound. Where? The flight is full. There is a jump seat in the galley, Greg said. Or I can see if there's a space in economy near the lavatory. But you cannot stay here. I paid $5,000 for this seat, Imani said, her voice shaking with rage. I am a Diamond Medallion member. You will not move me because this spoiled child can't hold her liquor. That's it, Greg said. He unclipped the radio from his belt. Captain, we have a level 2 disturbance in first class. Passenger in 3A is non-compliant and combative. The cabin went silent. The other passengers were awake now, watching the drama unfold. You're making a mistake, Imani said, her voice dropping to a low, intense register. A very big mistake. Get up, Greg ordered, now, or I will have the restraints brought out. Imani looked at him. She looked at Madison, who was smirking behind a tissue. She realized, with terrifying clarity, that truth didn't matter here. Power mattered. And right now, she had none. She unbuckled her belt. Wait. The voice came from the front. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the engines like a knife. Arthur Sterling stood up in 1A. He was holding onto his seat back for stability against the turbulence. He looked frail, but his eyes were blazing. "Sit down, sir," Greg said dismissively. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me," Arthur said, stepping into the aisle. He walked slowly toward row 3, ignoring the swaying of the plane. "Because I've been listening. And I've been watching." "Sir, return to your seat for your own safety," Greg warned, stepping forward to block him. Arthur stopped. He straightened his back, seeming to grow 3 inches taller. "Young man, do you know the protocol for clear air turbulence?" Greg blinked, confused by the pivot. "What?" "Sir, sit down. The protocol," Arthur continued, his voice steady, "requires flight attendants to secure themselves immediately, not to harass paying passengers based on the hallucinations of a drunk woman." "Excuse me?" Madison gasped. "Who is this cryptic old freak?" Arthur turned his gaze to Madison. It was a look of such profound disappointment that she actually shrank back into her seat. "I am the man who is trying to enjoy a flight on his own airline." The cabin went deadly silent. Even the engines seemed to quiet down. Greg laughed nervously. "Sir, please. You're confused. This is Sovereign Airways." "I know," Arthur said. He reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a black card made of titanium. He didn't hand it to Greg. He held it up. It wasn't a credit card. It was an identification badge. It had the Sovereign logo, and below it the title, Chairman Emeritus and Founder. "I am Arthur Sterling," he said. "I founded this company in 1978, and I am currently wondering why I shouldn't fire you before we even touch the ground." Greg's face drained of color. It went past pale. It went gray. He looked at the badge, then at the old man. The name Arthur Sterling was on the training manuals. It was on the welcome video. It was the name of the headquarters building. "Mr. Sterling?" Greg stammered. "And you?" Arthur said, turning to Imani. "My apologies, madam. I should have stepped in sooner, but I wanted to see exactly how my staff treats our guests when they think no one is watching." "It's fine," Imani said, though her hands were trembling. "It is not fine," Arthur said firmly. He looked at Greg. "Get this woman a towel. Get her a fresh glass of water. And then, you will cut Miss Courtney off from the bar. If she speaks another word of abuse to anyone on this plane, you will restrain her." "Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir," Greg squeaked. But Madison started, her entitlement warring with her shock. "My father is—" Arthur leaned in close to her. "Young lady, I know your father. Robert Courtney leases his private jets from me. If you say one more word, I will have your name added to the no-fly list of every airline in the One World Alliance by the time we land. Try me." Madison snapped her mouth shut. Arthur looked at Imani. "Madam, please. Stay in your seat. If you need anything at all, you tell me." He turned to go back to 1A, but suddenly, the plane pitched violently downward. A scream ripped through the cabin. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency red strobes. The captain's voice came over the intercom, breathless and terrified. "Code red. We have lost hydraulic pressure in the starboard wing. Prepare for impact." The drama in the cabin instantly evaporated, replaced by primal fear. Arthur stumbled. Greg fell to his knees. Imani didn't scream. Her eyes went wide, but her brain shifted gears. The fear vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of a pilot and engineer. She looked out the window. The wing flaps were stuck at an odd angle. The plane was banking hard, spiraling. She unbuckled her seatbelt again. "What are you doing?" Arthur yelled over the chaos. "Strap in. The pilots are fighting the stick." Imani yelled back, standing up and grabbing the overhead rail. "It's a servo failure. If they try to pull up, they'll stall. I need to get to the cockpit." "You can't," Greg screamed from the floor. "It's locked." Imani looked at Arthur Sterling. "Who are you?" she asked. "I told you, I'm the owner." "Then tell them to let me in," Imani roared, her voice commanding the space. "I am a lead hydraulics engineer for Boeing and a former USAF test pilot. I wrote the manual on this failure. If they don't correct the trim manually, we are going to crash in the Atlantic in 3 minutes. Arthur Sterling looked at the woman he had just saved. He saw the fire in her eyes. He didn't see a nobody. He saw the only hope they had. He grabbed the interphone handset from the wall, punching in the emergency cockpit code that only the crew and the owner knew. "Captain, this is Sterling. Open the door. I'm sending someone in who knows how to save this plane." The distance between row 3A and the cockpit door was less than 20 feet, but traversing it felt like running across the deck of a ship in a hurricane. The Boeing 777 lurched violently to the left, throwing Greg, the flight attendant, against the galley wall with a sickening thud. The screams from the cabin were a cacophony of terror, high-pitched shrieks from Madison, low groans of fear from the businessmen, and the wailing of a child in the rear cabin. Arthur Sterling, despite his age, had the adrenaline of a man who had built an empire from scrap metal. He keyed the code into the keypad beside the reinforced door. Click. Buzz. The door didn't open. The security deadlock was engaged from the inside. "They're not letting us in," Arthur shouted, his voice cracking. "They think it's a hijacking attempt. It's the automated lockdown protocol." Imani didn't hesitate. She didn't look at the keypad. She looked at the small, obscured emergency access panel at the base of the door, a feature designed for maintenance crews, usually hidden behind a decorative molding. She dropped to her knees, bracing herself against the bulkhead as the plane pitched nose down again. "Give me your pen," she yelled at Arthur. Arthur handed over his heavy, gold-plated fountain pen. Imani jammed the metal tip into the release catch, twisting it with force that snapped the expensive instrument in half. A pop echoed, and the panel slid open. She reached inside, finding the manual override lever that bypassed the electronic lock in the event of a total power failure or a specific hydraulic fault. She yanked the lever. The cockpit door hissed and swung inward. The scene inside was a nightmare of flashing red lights and deafening alarms. The whoop-whoop pull-up terrain warning was blaring, mixing with the master caution chime. Captain Miller was slumped over the center console, a trickle of blood running from his temple. He had been thrown against the overhead panel during the initial violent drop. The first officer, a young man named Chen, was gripping the yoke with both hands, his face a mask of sheer panic. He was pulling back with all his strength, but the plane was still diving. "Get out," Chen screamed, not looking back. "We're going down. The stabilizer is jammed." Imani didn't argue. She scrambled into the captain's seat, unbuckling the unconscious Miller and shoving his limp body back as Arthur pulled him out of the chair. Imani strapped herself in, her hands flying across the controls with a familiarity that bypassed conscious thought. "Status report," Imani barked. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Chen looked at her, his eyes wide. He saw a black woman in a turtleneck, not a uniform. "Who are you?" "Get out." "I am Dr. Imani Lewis, former USAF test pilot and lead engineer on the 777 Stabilizer Retrofit Program," she roared over the alarms. "Your horizontal stabilizer is trimmed fully nose down because the servo valve sheared. If you keep pulling back on the yoke, you're going to stall the main wing, and we will spin into the ocean. Do you understand?" The authority in her voice cut through Chen's panic. He nodded, terrified. "I can't hold the nose up. It's too heavy." "Let go of the yoke, Chen." "What? No." "Let go. You're fighting the aerodynamics." Imani reached over and slapped his hands off the controls. The plane pitched down sharply. The ocean, dark and churning, filled the windscreen. They were falling at 8,000 feet per minute. "Throttle to idle," Imani shouted. She slammed the thrust levers back. "Disengage the hydraulic pumps for the tail. We have to fly it manually." "That will kill the rudder," Chen yelled. "We don't need the rudder. We need pitch." Imani flipped 3 overhead switches. The warning lights for the hydraulic system flared. Then the pressure gauge dropped to 0. The controls went heavy, dead weight. The plane was now a 300-ton brick falling out of the sky. But crucially, the nose stopped fighting them. The jammed stabilizer, no longer powered by the rogue hydraulics, stayed fixed. But the elevators on the wings were now responding to the backup cable system, the Iron Bird mode. "Both hands on the wheel," Imani ordered. "On my mark, we pull. Smoothly. If we pull too hard, the wings rip off. 1, 2, pull." Together, they hauled the yokes back. The muscles in Imani's arms screamed. The G-force slammed her into the seat, crushing the air from her lungs. The gray ocean rushed closer, 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet. The nose began to rise. Slowly, agonizingly, the horizon line drifted back into view. The altimeter bottomed out at 800 feet seconds from impact before the needle began to creep upward. Power, Imani shouted. Give me 60%, N1. Gently. Chen advanced the throttles. The engines roared, and the plane stabilized, climbing sluggishly back to 10,000 feet. The cockpit was silent, save for the heavy breathing of the two pilots and the hum of the avionics. You, Chen whispered, staring at her. You arrested the dive. Imani didn't smile. She was scanning the fuel gauges. We're not done. We have no rear hydraulics. We have no flaps. We have no brakes. And we're over the middle of the Atlantic. Arthur Sterling leaned into the cockpit. He had dragged the unconscious captain to the jump seat and strapped him in. Dr. Lewis, he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and fear. Can we make it to London? Imani shook her head. No. The drag from the jam stabilizer is burning fuel at 3 times the normal rate. We'll never make the coast. We need to find the nearest strip of concrete. She tapped the flight management computer. Keflavik is too far north against the wind. Gander is behind us. She zoomed in on the map. The Azores. Lajes Field. It's a military base, long runway. That's 400 miles, Chen said. Do we have the fuel? We're going to glide, Imani said grimly. We climb to 30,000, then we cut the engines to idle and drift down. It's the only way. She keyed the radio. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Sovereign 882. Severe control failure. Diverting to Lajes. Requesting immediate clearance and emergency equipment on the ground. Souls on board. She paused. 214. Back in the first-class cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from panic to a terrifying, suffocating dread. The plane was flying, but it felt wrong. It was vibrating, a low, shuddering frequency that rattled the teeth. Madison Courtney was curled into a ball in seat 3B. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. The champagne she had spilled was sticky on her legs. She was no longer the arrogant socialite. She was a frightened child. Greg, the flight attendant who had tried to throw Imani into the galley, was sitting in the crew jump seat, staring blankly at the wall. He knew. He knew that the man in the cockpit, the man he had dismissed, was the owner of the company, and he knew that the woman flying the plane was the one he had threatened to arrest. The irony was a physical weight in his stomach. Arthur Sterling emerged from the cockpit. He looked 10 years older, but his voice was steady. He picked up the cabin interphone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Arthur Sterling. I am speaking to you from the front of the aircraft. The passengers looked up. Who is this old man? Your captain has been incapacitated, Arthur continued. However, we are in excellent hands. Dr. Imani Lewis, a passenger who stepped up when we needed her most, is currently piloting this aircraft. She has stabilized the plane. Madison's head snapped up. The black woman? She whispered. The one eye? We are diverting to the Azores, Arthur said. It will be a rough landing. I need everyone to listen to the flight attendants. Prepare the cabin. He hung up and walked to seat 3A. He picked up Imani's bag, the cheap, worn leather satchel Madison had sneered at. He placed it carefully on the seat, strapping it in as if it were a precious jewel. Madison watched him. Is she really flying it? Arthur looked down at her. His eyes were cold. She saved your life 3 minutes ago, Miss Courtney. While you were crying about your champagne, she was pulling 4 Gs to keep you from becoming a stain on the ocean floor. Madison opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Shame, hot and unfamiliar, pricked at her skin. When we land, Arthur said, leaning closer, if we land, you will not say a word. You will not complain about your legs. You will not ask for a manager. You will thank God that Imani Lewis was on this flight. The descent into the Azores was grueling. For 40 minutes, the plane drifted downward, the engines barely turning. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. Inside the cockpit, Imani was sweating. The physical toll of flying a 777 with limited hydraulics was immense. Her arms ached. Visual on the runway, Chen called out. Lajes Tower says, we are cleared for any runway. Wind is 20 knots, crosswind. We can't do a crosswind landing, Imani gritted out. We have no rudder authority. If the wind catches the tail, we flip. We have to crab it in, Chen said. No, Imani said. We come in hot, high speed. We slam it down before the wind can take us. We're going to blow the tires. We have no brakes, Imani, Chen yelled. We'll go off the end of the runway. The thrust reversers are still operational on the engines, Imani said. We use full reverse. And we pray the gear holds. The runway lights of Lagos Field twinkled in the twilight. It looked like a lifeline, thin and fragile. Cabin, brace for impact, Imani said over the PA. Her voice was calm, the voice of a mother soothing a child. Heads down, stay down. The ground rushed up. 200 knots. 180 knots. Way too fast. Flare, Chen shouted. Imani pulled back. The 777 floated for a second, fighting gravity, and then, slam. The main gear hit the concrete with the force of a bomb going off. The plane bounced, groaned, and slammed down again. Reversers, Imani screamed. They yanked the throttle levers into reverse. The engines roared, screaming in protest. The plane shuddered violently, shaking like a wet dog. Bang! A tire blew out. Then another. The plane pulled hard to the left, toward the grass. Right engine, full power, Imani commanded. She jammed the right throttle forward while keeping the left in reverse differential thrust to steer the plane since the rudder was dead. It worked. The nose swung back to the center line. The end of the runway was approaching fast. The ocean cliffs were just beyond it. Brakes, brakes. Chen stomped on the pedals uselessly. Hold on, Imani yelled. The plane skidded, sparks flying from the rim of the blown wheels. It slowed. 80 knots. 60 knots. 40 knots. It groaned to a halt 50 feet from the edge of the tarmac. Silence. Then, the sudden hissing sound of the emergency slides deploying. Evacuate. Evacuate. The evacuation was chaotic, but successful. Passengers slid down the yellow chutes into the cool, salty air of the Azores. Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane, bathing the scene in flashing blue and red lights. Imani was the last to leave the cockpit. She unbuckled her harness, her hands shaking uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was fading. She looked at Captain Miller, who was groaning, waking up. You did good, Chen said, grabbing her hand. He was weeping. You saved us. Imani nodded, too exhausted to speak. She grabbed her satchel from the cabin and slid down the chute. On the tarmac, it was a scene of hysteria. Passengers were hugging, crying, calling their families. Madison Courtney was standing near the wing, wrapped in a foil emergency blanket. She was shivering, looking at the smoking landing gear of the massive jet. She looked small. Arthur Sterling was standing next to the fire chief, speaking Portuguese fluent enough to coordinate the logistics. He saw Imani land on the tarmac. He broke away from the officials and walked toward her. He didn't shake her hand. He hugged her. It was a breach of protocol, perhaps, but nobody cared. Thank you, Arthur whispered. My God, thank you. Imani pulled back, wiping soot from her forehead. Just doing my job, Mr. Sterling. No, Arthur said firmly. You were doing the job of 3 people. And you're not even on my payroll. Yet, just then, a news crew from a local station, who had been listening to the scanner, broke through the perimeter fence line. They rushed toward the passengers, microphones extended. They spotted Madison. With her blonde hair and ruined, expensive clothes, she looked like the star of the flight. Miss, can you tell us what happened? The reporter asked in broken English. Old habits die hard. Madison straightened up, smoothing her hair. The camera light turned on. The victim narrative began to form in her mind. She could spin this. She survived a crash. She was a hero of survival. It was terrifying, Madison said, her voice trembling theatrically. The pilot. I think he was drunk. The plane was out of control. I was in first class, and I had to keep everyone calm. It was a nightmare. The service was awful, too. The flight attendant was aggressive. She pointed at Greg, who was standing nearby with the paramedics. He ignored my safety concerns. Greg looked at her, his jaw dropping. And, Madison continued, eyes darting to Imani, there was a passenger who was causing a disturbance right before the crash. I really think she distracted the crew. She's standing right there. She pointed a manicured finger at Imani. The reporter turned the camera toward Imani. Ma'am, did you cause a disturbance? Imani looked at the camera. She was covered in sweat, grease, and exhaustion. She looked at Madison, who was smirking slightly, a reflex of her lifelong privilege. Madison actually believed she could control the narrative because she was Madison. Courtney and Imani was nobody. But this time, the silence didn't stretch. Cut the feed, Arthur Sterling's voice boomed. He stepped into the frame, pushing the camera lens down. Who are you? The reporter asked. I am Arthur Sterling, CEO of Sovereign Airways. The reporter's eyes widened. Mr. Sterling, turn the camera back on, Arthur ordered. Live? Yes, live. Good. Arthur turned to Madison. Miss Courtney, you have a remarkable imagination. Madison stammered. Mr. Sterling, you were just lying, Arthur said, his voice projected so every passenger and every viewer at home could hear. Let me clarify what happened on Flight 882. He gestured to Imani. This woman, Dr. Imani Lewis, is not a disturbance. She is the reason you are breathing right now. While you were complaining about the legroom and harassing my crew, she entered the cockpit, took command of a crippled aircraft, and landed it without functional hydraulics. The crowd of passengers gasped. They turned to look at Imani with new eyes. And as for the drunk pilot you mentioned, Arthur continued, stepping closer to Madison, Captain Miller suffered a head injury. And the aggressive flight attendant? Well, Greg? Arthur turned to Greg. Greg, come here. Greg walked over, looking like he was walking to the gallows. Greg, Arthur said, I witnessed you threaten Dr. Lewis. I saw you prioritize this woman's, he pointed to Madison, delusions over a paying customer's dignity. You threatened to arrest the woman who just saved your life. Sir, Greg started. You're fired, Arthur said. Effective immediately. You will find your own way home from the Azores. You are no longer Sovereign Airways crew. Greg collapsed onto the tarmac, sobbing. Arthur turned back to Madison. And you, Miss Courtney, you mentioned your father Robert earlier. You said he owns the West Wing of JFK? Madison was pale. I'm calling him right now, Arthur said, pulling out a satellite phone. I think he needs to see the video. What video? Madison whispered. Arthur pointed to the side. A young teenager, a boy of about 14, was holding up a phone. He had been recording the entire flight. The harassment, the drink spilling, the lies. I got it all, the kid said, grinning. Already uploaded to TikTok, 4 million views in 10 minutes. You're trending, lady. Plain Karen. Madison whipped out her own phone. Her notifications were exploding, but they weren't likes. They were hate, pure, unadulterated vitriol. Her brand deals Lululemon, Revolve, Sephora were tagging her. At Sephora, we do not condone the behavior exhibited by Madison Courtney. We are terminating our partnership effective immediately. At Revolve, disgusting. Contract voided, Madison screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was the scream of a narcissist whose mirror had shattered. My daddy will sue you, she shrieked at Arthur. He'll buy this airline just to fire you. Arthur smiled, a wolfish smile. Let's ask him. He put the phone on speaker. Arthur? Robert Courtney's voice came through, sounding strained. I'm watching the news. Is my daughter there? Daddy, Madison yelled. These people are attacking me. You have to. Shut up, Madison, Robert roared. The silence on the tarmac was deafening. Daddy? I've seen the video, Madison. I've seen how you treated that woman. I've seen you lie to the press. Robert's voice was shaking with rage. Do you know who Imani Lewis is? Her firm just approved the zoning permits for my Manhattan skyscraper project. And you just treated her like garbage on international television. Imani raised an eyebrow. She hadn't mentioned that part. I am cutting you off, Robert said. The cards are canceled. The apartment is going on the market. You are on your own, Madison. Figure it out. Click. Madison stood there, the phone dead in her hand. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She looked at Imani. Imani looked back. She didn't gloat. She didn't laugh. She just adjusted her satchel, looked Madison in the eye, and said, You were right about one thing. It is a long flight. She turned and walked toward the terminal, leaving Madison Courtney alone on the cold concrete, a nobody in a foreign land. The tarmac at Lodges Field was just the beginning. In the age of the internet, the story didn't stay on the island. It traveled at the speed of light. By the time the replacement aircraft, a massive Airbus A380 sent by a partner airline, arrived to pick up the stranded passengers 12 hours later, the world had already picked a side. The fallout. Madison Courtney sat in the sterile holding room of the Lajes Airport police station. She wasn't waiting for the replacement flight. She was waiting for the FBI. Because the incident occurred on an American-flagged carrier, U.S. federal law applied, and interfering with a flight crew was a felony. She huddled in her ruined cashmere, scrolling through her phone with trembling fingers. The hashtag numbered plane Karen was no longer just trending. It was global news. The video the teenager had recorded was everywhere. It showed her sneering face, her cruel words, her fake tears. But worse than the video were the remixes. People were mocking her voice, her entitlement. "This can't be real," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm Madison Courtney." The door opened. 2 agents in dark suits walked in, followed by a Portuguese official. They didn't look impressed. "Miss Courtney," the lead agent said, sitting down opposite her. "I'm Agent Miller. We have statements from the flight crew, the passengers, and Mr. Arthur Sterling himself. We also have video evidence of you assaulting a passenger with a beverage and making false statements to federal authorities regarding a security threat." "I didn't mean to," Madison cried. "I was stressed. It was a panic attack. You attempted to have a specialized engineer removed from her seat during a critical flight failure based on a lie," the agent said, his voice flat. "Do you realize that if Mr. Sterling hadn't intervened and Dr. Lewis had been locked in the galley, that plane would likely be at the bottom of the Atlantic right now?" The weight of that reality hit Madison like a physical blow. She wasn't just a Karen anymore. She was almost an accessory to manslaughter. The boardroom. 1 week later, New York City was gray and rainy. But inside the penthouse boardroom of the Sovereign Airways headquarters in Manhattan, the mood was electric. Dr. Imani Lewis sat at the head of the table. She looked different. The fatigue that had clung to her at JFK was gone, replaced by a quiet, steely confidence. She wore a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back in an elegant twist. Arthur Sterling sat to her right. The rest of the board members, men and women who controlled billions in assets, looked at her with undisguised respect. "The NTSB report is preliminary," Imani said, pointing to the screen displaying the schematics of the servo valve. "But it confirms my hypothesis. The chaotic vibration from the clear air turbulence caused a fatigue fracture in the secondary hydraulic seal. It was a 1 in a billion defect. A defect you identified in 3 seconds, Arthur noted. A defect I wrote a paper on 10 years ago, Imani corrected gently. Nobody read it because it was deemed too theoretical. Arthur leaned forward. "We're not making that mistake again. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard my proposal. Sovereign Airways is establishing a new division, the Sterling Lewis Institute for Aerospace Safety. We will have independent oversight over every manufacturer we buy from. We will rewrite the training manuals." He turned to Imani. "And we want you to run it. Name your price." Imani looked at the contract in front of her. The number was staggering. It was generational wealth. It was enough to fund the scholarship programs she had always dreamed of. It was enough to ensure her children, and their children, would never be treated like nobodies. She picked up the pen, a simple ballpoint this time, and signed. "One condition," Imani said, capping the pen. "Anything," Arthur said. "The flight attendants," she said. "The ones who aren't Greg. The ones who did their jobs, who were terrified but kept the passengers calm. I want their pay doubled. And I want a zero-tolerance policy for passenger abuse written into the ticket contract. If someone abuses my crew, they are banned for life. No exceptions for VIPs." Arthur smiled. Done. The descent. 6 months later, the courtroom in the Southern District of New York was packed. United States v. Madison Courtney. Madison looked gaunt. Her blonde hair was dull, tied back in a messy bun. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a cheap department store suit. Her father, Robert Courtney, was not in the gallery. He had issued a press release on the day of her arrest, disowning her actions and severing her access to the family trust to protect the integrity of the Courtney Real Estate Group. She was alone. The defense attorney, a public defender because she could no longer afford a private firm, made a plea for leniency. He spoke of her affluenza, her lack of understanding of the real world. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Holloway, wasn't buying it. Miss Courtney, the judge said, looking over her spectacles, you treated a fellow human being as subhuman because of the color of her skin and the cut of her clothes. You endangered hundreds of lives to satisfy your own ego. You have shown no genuine remorse, only regret for the consequences you now face. Madison stared at the floor, tears leaking from her eyes. I sentence you to 18 months in federal prison, the judge declared, followed by 3 years of probation. And as a special condition of your probation, you will complete 2,000 hours of community service. Specifically, in the sanitation department of JFK International Airport. The gavel banged. A gasp went through the courtroom. The janitorial staff. Madison Courtney was going to clean the toilets in the very terminal where she had snapped her fingers at Imani. The twist of fate. 5 years had passed. The aviation industry had changed. The Lewis Protocol for Hydraulic Failure was now standard training for every pilot in the world. Sovereign Airways was the safest, most profitable airline in the sky. Dr. Imani Lewis was traveling to Paris for the G7 summit, where she was a keynote speaker on global transportation infrastructure. She was walking through JFK Terminal 4, flanked by 2 assistants. She didn't need them for protection. She was beloved. People stopped to shake her hand, to thank her. She walked with her head high, wearing a coat that cost more than Madison's old car, carrying a bag that was custom-made for her in Milan. But she still had the same kind eyes. She stopped at the restroom near Gate A6, the same gate where it had all started. I'll be just a moment, she told her assistants. She walked into the restroom. It was spotless. The smell of bleach was strong. A woman in a gray jumpsuit was scrubbing the mirror. Her hair was gray and brittle, her hands red and chapped from harsh chemicals. She looked 20 years older than her actual age. Imani washed her hands at the sink. The woman in the jumpsuit kept her head down, scrubbing furiously, avoiding eye contact. She knew who walked in. Everyone knew Imani Lewis. Imani dried her hands. She looked at the woman's reflection in the mirror. She recognized the curve of the nose, the shape of the jaw. The mirror looks good, Imani said softly. The woman froze. She slowly lifted her head. Madison Courtney's eyes met Imani's in the glass. There was no arrogance left in them, only a deep, hollow shame and the exhaustion of a woman who had learned the hardest lesson of all. Madison's voice was a rasp. I'm trying to do a good job. It shows, Imani said. She reached into her purse. She didn't pull out money that would be an insult. She pulled out a card. It wasn't a business card. It was a card for a local community college. They have a program, Imani said, placing the card on the counter. For adult learners. Management, engineering, whatever you want, my foundation pays the tuition for. Staff members of the airport. Madison stared at the card. Her hands shook. Why? She whispered. After everything I did to you? Imani turned to leave. She paused at the door. Because I'm not you, Imani said. And because nobody is a nobody. She walked out, leaving Madison alone with the card, the mirror, and a second chance she didn't deserve, but was given anyway. The final karma. Imani boarded the plane, seat 1A. Arthur Sterling, now fully retired but joining her for the trip, looked up from his newspaper. Did you see her? Arthur asked. I did, Imani said, buckling her belt. You're a better woman than I am, Arthur grunted. I would have fired her again. She's serving her time, Arthur, Imani said, looking out the window as the engines spooled up a sound that no longer scared her, but sounded like victory. Besides, I think she finally understands. Understands what? That gravity doesn't care who your father is, Imani said. We all fall the same, and we all have to pull ourselves back up. The plane taxied out. As it lifted off, soaring over the gray Queens landscape, soaring over the past, Imani Lewis closed her eyes and finally, truly, rested. She had arrived. This story isn't just about a plane ride, it's about the invisible baggage we carry and the dangerous assumption that status equals worth. Madison Courtney thought her platinum ticket gave her the right to dehumanize a stranger, but she learned the hard way that in a crisis, your bank account can't fly a plane. Dr. Imani Lewis showed us that true power is competence, dignity, and grace under pressure. It's a reminder that the quiet person you shove past in the line might be the only one capable of saving your life. The world has a way of balancing the scales. Sometimes it takes a CEO, sometimes it takes a hydraulic failure, but karma always arrives on time. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode of real-life drama and instant karma. What would you have done if you were in seat 3A? Would you have helped Madison at the end? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next video.